Well, 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 look who's back. Yeah, it's been a little while since I've done a video. Apologies, I don't mean to take so long in between. I was kind of beating myself up over not getting anything done in the last couple of weeks, but um, I don't know. Everybody's human. I have good times and bad times. The bad days that I had over the last couple of weeks, I didn't feel like doing really anything other than trying to de-stress myself, which doesn't involve doing this, because this can be kind of stressful. You have to look at a lot of negative information, so... Uh, and then I got lucky. I had a couple of really nice days where it was time to go bring my garden in anyway, and there was some family out there. So I spent, each day, Saturday and Sunday, just being out there the whole time and conversing with family, having some really good talks. Really good talks. Mm. My one cousin, he, don't see him very often, but, he was kind of in the know about a lot of this stuff quite a long time ago. He knew a mechanic named Joe. And so he would go and hang out with Joe once in a while. And one day, it's like, what's up with all these books? Because the guy had, his mechanic shop looked like half like a library. He had books all over the place. And so at that point, Joe started to reveal to him, his past. And Joe was in a concentration camp as a young man. Or not even quite a man yet, still a teenager, actually. And after he made it through the Holocaust, um, he wanted to know what was going on. Why is the Second World War happening? What are all wars from? What was the deal with the First World War? He just became really interested in the subject. And so obviously pre-internet days, the only way he could find out was to go and dig around in books. Just go and find as many books as he could. So that's what all of his books were about. His books were like a red pill library of the day. And he had concocted a theory that revolved around something called Group of Seven, and that it had to do with them. Now, personally, I don't even know a lot about this either. It's something I have to look into myself, but I guess it's one of those deals where you go to look it up online, and it'll bring you up all kinds of other things to do with Group of Seven other than what you're looking for. So at any rate, he wanted to know what was going on in the world, and then he wanted to show Brian. Brian showed some interest, so he wrote down everything on a sheet of paper, and he said, this is who's responsible for what right now, what's going on, and what they plan on doing in the future, but I'm only going to give this to you with the promise that after you read it, you burn it. He wanted him to get rid of it, because that's like how deadly it felt back in those days. It still feels dangerous now talking about some of this stuff, but not as bad as it might have been back then, where the odd person was getting double tap, fucking suicided to the back of the head, you know what I'm saying? Nowadays, I think it's just easier for them to uh, use psyops like tinfoil hatter and all that stuff to label people who talk about this kind of thing. So most people aren't interested. They just shame you from talking about it or talking about to people who talk about this kind of stuff. Um, and then they don't have to whack person after person after person where it starts to get pretty obvious what's going on. So they've managed to eliminate that. So at any rate, back to the story. He's like, you got to burn this after you're done with it. It's dangerous information to be in possession of. So he's like, okay, fine. Well, I'll burn it after I read it. So he goes home and he reads it. And then he sees him the next week. You go over for like weekly coffee or something like that on Wednesdays, right? So he shows up. And Joe's like, so did you read that? He says, yeah, I read that. He says, what did you do with it? Did you burn it? He says, no, I didn't burn it yet. He's like, well, you have to. I told you have to. He said, you have to leave right now because you haven't burnt it yet. You need to get rid of it. I'm dead serious about this. I'm dead serious. So he's like, okay, fine. Look, I promise you I'll burn them. I'll bring them here to you next week. Can we just have coffee today and I'll burn this shit next week in front of you? So, okay, fine. That's good. So he does it. He brings it back to him and he burns it in front of him the next week. But that's how serious it was to get rid of the information. Now about Joe being in the concentration camp in the Holocaust, he ends up coming across the negative situation of knowing that it was a bunch of people that he was associated with that were responsible for this. Now, I personally don't believe it's every last one. I used to be hung up into the deep conspiracy that, one means all, and I mean, that's bad. That's groupthink too, and I was wrong for doing that. But he winds up not liking his own people. He's like, I know that it was people from my group that were responsible for this, and I can't stand it. I don't like any of them anymore. So he was kind of a self-hater as you might say it. I think he just knew what was going on, and he's wrong to not like all of them. It's probably not true anyway. Who knows how much family he had left and how much he was involved with the community even. So, but at any rate, that's what I ended up talking about all over again, and we just talked about all the current stuff to do with that kind of theme because we've been talking about this stuff uh, out at my garden for a long time, where it is with that cousin specifically, and the other ones get involved with it a little bit too, right? But so anyway, it was a good time, good talk. It was motivating to try to do more stuff, to try to get more people into the know on this kind of shit. And some of the stuff that I'm going to try guiding people towards for information right now should hopefully lead up into that, to connect it all firmly as to who's doing this and why. And then at the same time, I realized we have to talk about solutions too, personal solutions, because trying to get a group solution right now that's going to work is going to be difficult. I've seen groups get completely taken over and then brought into a different direction than they should have been going. Like when the Canadian Yellow Vests showed up, they weren't firm enough in what they believed. They allowed themselves to be fractured by someone who actually is a politician here in my town. Glenn Carrott is the one who led the charge on that, but he excluded a bunch of people because he's scared of certain aspects of the politics too, right? So again, we're well divided. It's how do you get it? How to get a group of people to even really make things happen? What you want to have happen anyway? That didn't do shit. Didn't do anything but make some people feel good for a little bit and then probably feel worse afterwards. It was useless. I don't know, if you have people that are close to you, that's about the best group you can get in with. If you have 5, 10 good friends, you have a really good family that are tight knit or whatever, and you can talk to them about this kind of stuff, then you have to get everybody ready for what could potentially be coming. Now, to me, you don't even have to be paranoid about this. Whether or not it's a man-made disaster or a natural disaster, people should just be ready anyway. What you need to be ready with, well, you have to be able to defend yourself. It's hard to say whether that's number one or not, because ultimately without that happening, the rest of it can just disappear. So defense, water first. You can't do anything without that. Food, shelter, clothing, medical supplies. If you don't have these things, you are at the whim of whatever disaster comes your way. That's all there is to it. Throughout any kind of disaster, as I say, man-made or natural, the only people who do well through it are people who can, yes, also potentially hide, but also have all their basic needs looked after. You can even get away without the self-defense aspect if you're well hidden, which is a reality too. So anyway, that's what I was doing, picking my garden, 150 pounds roughly I yielded of potatoes this year. A friend of mine, she worked at a place that has heirloom potatoes, and so everywhere was out in town, so I phoned her up, and they had some, so I got a good deal on uh, my potatoes that I cut apart to, grow my field out of, kind of thing. So 150 pounds of that didn't cost me more than, I think it was 10 or 15 bucks for what I needed to produce that. It was nothing. So that's good. I'm looked after on that aspect, and I'll have enough potatoes for next year that I can just keep reusing them to reseed with. So I've been gardening for about 5 years, but I've been lazy on trying to make my own seed. But that's going to be the new hobby. I've got some potato seed right now, not just mother potatoes that you cut apart with the eyes and grow more out of. So that's the kind of thing that people should be thinking about doing. If you don't have any room to do it in, I'm sure you can go find somewhere to rent. I guarantee you there's people out there that are hurting, even farmers who'd be willing to till up a chunk of land for you to plant a bunch of stuff on. If he takes 40 or 50 bucks, start low on him, great. If it costs you 60 or $100, even somewhere in there, for what you can get out of it, as long as it's a big enough plot and you half know what you're doing, it'll pay for itself and then some. So that's the kind of thing people can do to look after themselves. You need to be able to perpetually look after yourself, because without that, you are a slave. People talk about the slavery. How do you actually get out of it? Well, until you can actually be self-sufficient without much else involved around you, then you're not going to really truly be free. And that freedom also comes with the aspect of safe too, like I say, and if something bad happens, you can look after yourself. People in the Depression might have actually been better off in a sense when it went through, because the majority of them knew how to look after themselves and they had the means to do it. So they fared better than anyone else did, is the reality of that. There was actually, quite interestingly, prior to the civil rights movement, there was a good deal of black farmers who owned their own property and had a farm, and they were able to look after themselves too. They had pigs, chickens, they had some land growing grains, and they could look after themselves completely. So there's a lot of folks who might be interested in that information now, that knowing pre-civil rights movement, blacks were quite well off. I listened a lot to Jesse Peterson and some others. Peterson specifically is interesting because he grew up on a plantation as a young man, and uh, under Jim Crow laws, and he says to the mind blowing results of people that he talks to, which is a lot of people that are interested in left wing ideology or philanthropy, that things were better then than they are now for black people. And actually, when you look at it, Thomas Sowell, Larry Elder, Walter Williams, they all say that, and that they gave up what they had as freedom for safety and security with the government. And that's a big complicated shabu too. The interesting thing I find about that is you actually get overlap with people's beliefs from the left and right on that. Or if you go watch Candace Owens debating, what's his name, Lord, I don't know, there's a bunch of rappers that she's debating anyway, and they have overlap. They believe that the family collapsing has been a major detriment to them. They just don't both agree why, and they maybe don't have the same method on how to fix that problem, which is, I think, a very difficult problem to tackle. Even if you started on it seriously today and people actually started taking it upon themselves to change, we're looking at 10, 20 years before it really actually would make a difference, where you could resurrect broken families and people to put down their criminal way of life. Like, people want to talk about sometimes that it was white colonialism or white supremacy because the government is mostly white that caused this. Now, it's interesting to note that yes, the government was found guilty of trucking cocaine into black neighborhoods and making crack out of it and getting the whole populace hooked, but I wouldn't look at that as the whole American government did that. There's people within the government who did that, and they need to be found. It's someone who operates on the inside, and no one really knows who they are. Like when I went over that first chapter of propaganda, he talks about only some people will be allowed to know the agenda, while others will have to just play their role, and they'll either line up with one side or the other side, and then do their bidding, or they won't know anything at all. I guess the idea is to keep a bunch of people believing that what's being said is true. So you need to have agents subverting groups of people. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I know I was talking about um, resurrection of families and things like that. Yeah, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. So at any rate, you need to be able to look after yourself. That's topics that'll have to be diving into, and trying to figure out the people that are directly responsible for what's going on right now. Everything sort of ties together. I've found links between hospitals in the States that are already willing to use vaccines from companies, and certain people donate to both of these, as well as donating to other philanthropic efforts to do with race and things like that. So, there's like a communist agenda that's going on, and it needs to be routed out. When enough people know about it, maybe something can be done about it. When you stop voting for them, it seems to be the best way, but they're always going to be trying. It's like a constant battle. We almost need a little bit of McCarthyism brought back in. Communism shouldn't be tolerated in democracy. Democracy wasn't designed to allow communism in the side fucking door. To me, those people are enemies of the state, no different than Nazis, and they should be gotten rid of. It doesn't belong. So, anyway, yeah, I've got some vids to make about that kind of information coming up. So, anyway, thanks for sticking it out and still being here after a couple weeks of no information, and try to work on some good quality stuff here. I've done a lot of reading lately, but of course, it just takes you further down the rabbit hole, which doesn't really help when you want to make a video and you're too busy information sourcing yourself and seeking. So, but anyway, quality, I guess, will be coming out because of that. So, still in the ring. Hopefully the next stuff is really people find really interesting. I found it really interesting, like mind-blowing, actually. So hang in there. We got some more stuff coming. Peace.